Yeah, so this is gonna be another one talking about the found footage horror movie micro budget improvised thing that I'm gonna make at the end of the year. I've done other episodes. I think I did an episode about the camera choices and the fact that we're gonna see the cameras they use because they're gonna be travel vloggers. And then I did an episode about the logic of should I have like a monster point of view or like an omniscient like cinematic point of view. So I'll link those two. Uh, if there's more, I'll link those too. This one's I'm going to talk about the logic of why it's going to be semi-scripted or improvised or whatever. So this is The League, a pretty famous semi-scripted show or improvised show. Curb Your Enthusiasm, I think, is the one that everybody thinks of, but even movies like this is Spinal Tap. That's kind of the vibe I'm going for a few reasons. But before I talk about the logic of that, I think I want to talk about a production that semi-inspired this that I was on years ago, probably like 7 or 8 years ago at this point, maybe more. Um, it was an overnight shoot with actors, with actors I recognize, with actors I've heard of, and a lot of money was put into it. But the idea was it was a thriller movie that just had like a 40-page outline, and they were just going to have the actors in costume, in character, improvise all night, and that they're going to have a movie at the end of it. Um, Long story short, I don't think the movie ever came out because I think the footage they got didn't work out. But it was really interesting to watch, and it kind of blew my mind a little bit. But yeah, every favor was called in. A lot of money was thrown into it. I think they had either 6 or 8 red cameras shooting simultaneously, so it was like a big deal. And it's because it was a commercial director, and so basically he called in all his favors, and so all the cast knew this commercial director. It was a big deal. I think I was BTS assistant or something. I was called in very late. Um, so I basically they would set up because we do this whole like 12-hour overnight in a warehouse in LA. And so they would set it up, this thriller movie. I'm not sure how many people got the outline. I got my hands on a copy of the like script. I think it was like either 20 or 40 pages of an outline, but it wasn't even that. It was kind of just like a summary of things that went on. Like each scene was basically a line, or each scene was like a paragraph. Um, the idea being there was no dialogue written. The actors were there to represent their characters as were developed with the director. I think, I don't know. I wasn't there for that, but yeah. So so when we went in, basically they had set up a whole scene in the warehouse where these guys, woke up from getting gassed or something and then tried to figure out what was going on. And it was like a whodunit kind of thing. It was pretty interesting and really high production value, I have to admit. But what happened was that, so they would set up the scene, and there were some real interesting directing choices that I'm a little hesitant to criticize, other than the fact that this guy had his own costume. He was basically in the scene with everybody wearing a mask as like a prison guard kind of thing. And so he wasn't directing while they were improvising, but he would direct between takes, and he would have to take his mask off, which cracked me up because they couldn't understand him. But he'd be in the scene. He put himself in the scene, which is something I want to do a little bit in the movie I'm making, not for vanity reasons, but for just practicality reasons. But so basically they would they'd get ready, they'd rehearse ish. I mean, basically they would just get a starting point, and then the director would call action, and all the cameras were just basically like capturing whatever they could capture. That's why there were so many cameras. It was kind of like a documentary kind of thing where they were just trying to, each person had their own camera basically. And so, but his cameras were obviously not visible. Every camera was on one side of the line, the imaginary 180-degree line. But yeah, and so the actors would improvise, and that some actors were good guys, some actors were bad guys, that kind of thing. And then he would say cut, and then I think I don't remember. I think at the beginning he said cut, and then later on he started saying reset. So cut means cut. So the cameras are cut, the sound recording is cut, the actors can relax, all that kind of stuff. Reset means we're not cutting anything. Get back to your beginning of this of the shot or the scene, and we're going again. And I think the director started to freak out a little bit, if I'm not speaking out of school, and just started calling resets. And so it went from each scene being like 10 or 15 to 30 seconds long to each scene being like 2 minutes, 5 minutes. I mean, we're dealing with red cameras, so I think the maximum amount of time we could have had would have been like 12 minutes or something. It wasn't, I mean, it wasn't a lot. But because he would just kept calling resets. And so what kind of happened, and I do want to acknowledge the director did something that I don't agree with, which was because he was in the scene, he a lot of times would take a step back behind a couple of the cameramen that were next to him, and he would physically grab the camera like person by like their shoulder or by like the scruff of their neck, and he would scoot them into a shot, into a position that he wanted. I think that's a little gauche. I don't remember if he did that with the actors too. I don't think he did, but if he did it with the actors, that's a full on red flag for me. You don't touch actors like that. That's really not okay. But he was doing that with crew too, and I understand in a sense why, because he had to be quiet because he was in costume, he was in character basically. But also, if you're going to take a step back behind the camera department and then physically move the camera department, like I don't I don't know how I feel about that. Um, anyway, as the night went on, things got a little bit more frustrating over time because it turns out that every actor they were like they ended up like competing with each other. So, the whole thing of improv is collaborate. Yes, and somebody says something and you double down on what they're doing. You help each other. You set up a situation for the next person. You can, you go as far as you can go, but you leave an open opportunity for somebody to jump in and take the idea and continue going. And I'm not sure whether it's because these were not traditionally, improvisationally taught actors, or whether these actors were just really nervous because this director was kind of a big deal. And so there was this weird escalation where, like, at some point, one actor just did like a 10 out of 10 intensity performance. And then once that happened, and it happened way too early over the course of the thing, so I'm pretty sure the thing was shot chronologically. But once that happened, all the other actors it was kind of like, oh my God, he's outshining me. Now I need to deliver 10 out of 10. And so it ended up being, like halfway through the night, every time action was called, every time reset was called, all the actors would just like jump into the middle-ish and start just screaming the same stuff at each other at like full intensity. Like there was no consideration of the context. There was no consideration of the build. They were just like screaming obscenities at each other because they thought that was the like what the scene was going for. I hadn't expected that. I don't think the director expected that either, because he didn't really have a good way to address that, and that may be inexperience, that may be confusion, that may be, maybe it was what he was going for. But it was basically the rest of the night was just trying to get the actors not to just, as soon as action was called, rush up to each other and grab each other and scream in each other's faces, which was not what the scene was supposed to be. But it gave me a lot to think about. So that was the story. I shot an overnight. I was part of an overnight, in a position that wasn't a mission critical position at all. Basically, my boss and I were just sitting in the corner, and during setup changes, we had a list of actors we needed to pull aside and interview for like a press kit, because credit where credit's due, the director thought ahead enough to have press kit material. So that was pretty cool. I think there was a BTS photographer there too. We were doing video. So, but yeah, it kind of spiraled out of control. And I'm not sure how far I totally got lost over the course of the night where they were in the outline. But they didn't get to the end of the outline. And I don't know if they pre-shot some stuff or not. I know they shot pickups, but I don't think I saw a trailer. It doesn't matter. The me critiquing whether or not it came out is not relevant. It's the idea that it was like a really interesting idea. The idea that you could bring a bunch of actors together and give them enough material, enough sort of a starting point to have a character or to formulate a character, and then to basically improvise a story in real time. I thought that was really interesting. You know, long form improv is this. I think where the director sort of wasn't ready is it was, I think it was a combination of the lack of experience of the actors in that way of working, but also just, you know, once somebody went to full intensity in a moment where you don't need it, everybody freaked out and was like, "Oh my God, I'm not going to make the movie because I'm not at full intensity. Now I have to do it too." I feel like that was kind of the thing, or they were just, you know, playing off each other, and this guy went full intensity. I got to match him, otherwise it's not going to make sense. I can understand that, but it didn't work. At least those particular moments didn't work because you gotta, there's a rhythm, there's a rising action. So I think it was a good call to try to shoot the movie in order, because that way that gives the actors and the production the best chance to track the flow of the story. I'm just not sure who and how much of the script was read by, I said that sounds weird, but basically I'm not sure if everybody read the script or outline or not. I don't know. Anyway, where that relates to me. So I'm thinking, for convenience sake, you strip away, if you take instead of, okay, so for my project, I'm not going to have a traditional script. I'm going to have an outline. I'm not sure. I'm waffling on whether, I think I'm going to write the whole script, maybe even with dialogue, and then just remove the dialogue and, you know, trim it down, like cut the outline down to a small enough package where it's literally just the framework, the skeleton of what it is, and nothing more. Because obviously it's already going to be shot the way it's going to be shot, which is kind of documentary style. So it's not going to have locations. It's just going to be wherever the actors go. So that's going to be the location. There's not really going to be any art direction or anything. It's just going to be how they're living their lives. I think I'm going to rent a vehicle for them to drive just to set the tone a little bit more. And when working with the actors, we'll figure out costumes, which is going to be their own clothes, but we'll have a conversation about that. And planning ahead time, but it's not going to be like traditionally shot where there's a makeup and wardrobe department, or makeup department, wardrobe department. There's not going to be an art department. There's not going to be a sound department. There's not going to be all these departments with the responsibility. I want it to be a much more organic, sort of just like seat of the pants thing. Honestly, the plan is, I'm just, you know, I think it would be really a bad faith gesture, or just not a good look for me to ask two actors, three actors on a tiny micro budget where I'm probably the only person in production working with them, for them to memorize dialogue and get off book. I think that's kind of messed up. So even if I thought that was what this project needed, and I don't think so, because there's definitely actors that can work an entire, you know, 90 minutes off book. Theater actors, that's kind of their whole thing. Movie actors, actors that are not theater actors, I guess, you know, they don't necessarily have that, and I'm not asking that of them. I'd rather have them say the words that are true to them. And so I think what I want to do is I'm gonna have this outline, no dialogue in it, and it's just gonna have beats, or at least a starting point of where the story starts, and then maybe I'm still waffling on whether how much I want to show the actors on where it's going to go. I think I want to show them a couple setups or a couple set pieces, so they just sort of understand the sort of the scope of what to expect. So that's not, if something comes completely out of nowhere, it doesn't freak them out. It doesn't take them out of it. But I want to be able to also get them surprised and have them work off of that. So I'm thinking like 2 or 3 in the fashion setups ahead of time for them to be introduced to, so that they know that this is, you know, the scope of how things are going to go, more or less. And then I think I just want to work with the actors ahead of time together to get the chemistry going, because obviously they're going to be doing this movie over a couple days, and I think at least if it's 2, they're going to be some kind of couple, you know, that kind of thing, because they're a travel vlogging channel. And then, but I also want to separate them out. And so they're going to have a starting point with their characters, but I also want to make sure that their characters each have a little bit different information, so that they're not all converging on the same thing, and they don't all sort of like sprint to the same thing, which is what I think is kind of the big problem that happened with that project I told the story about, is everybody ended up sprinting towards the same thing, where say you have a couple, one person in the couple, they're going to be going after this kind of thing because this is what their priority is. And so this is how conflict is going to build, because it's not going to be congruous. It's not going to intersect well with the other part of the other half of the couple, the other person. They're going to have a little bit different information. They're going to have different outcomes that they're going for, and there's going to be tension there. So it's not just that there's going to be this outside stuff that I'm going to throw at them, probably some kind of monster, definitely this, like, getting terrorized, sort of a home invasion in a tent kind of thing. But it's also going to be, probably some take on like a relationship problem where one person's, has a problem with this aspect of the relationship. The other person has this aspect of a relationship problem. If there's a third, there's a tertiary version of that kind of thing. The idea being, you get them into a good starting place, working ahead of time, weeks ahead, so that they have a good grasp on the character that they're doing, so they can sort of method it, which is not a thing I support, but I think for the sake of doing improv, I think that's the move, is they'll just be in character for the whole shoot and react as themselves, as their character. And so, the dialogue is going to be the dialogue that they say. Hopefully they don't talk identical to each other, because that would be brutal. But that's the game plan, is do a bunch of pre-work of sort of like a starting point. So sort of like a murder mystery kind of thing, where they have a starting point, and then once we go out there, they're going to be sort of just improvising their thing, and I'm just going to continuously introduce new things, and then hopefully with a little bit of luck and a little bit of effort, they're going to be able to improvise themselves into a situation where maybe I don't need to throw so many things at them, and they're just they've taken the situation, they've taken the conflict that's been building, and they run with it, and that'll be the movie, hopefully. So, weird idea. It's definitely going to need a bunch of testing. It's going to need a bunch of practicing. I'm definitely going to have to grab some actors ahead of time and do the pre-work and see if I can get a scene going with them, that kind of thing. Because it's a different way of working. It's a lot less. You read the pages, you memorize the dialogue, you go out. The production has built something around you, and you inhabit the character and do it. This is much more, sort of a gritty, real experience kind of thing that just happens to be captured, and it just happens to be not who they are. So it's kind of like half play, half like long form improv, with an element of me in the shadows somewhere producing, which probably means, again, terrorizing them on their camping adventure, and or being a monster, like putting a monster in a costume or something. I don't know. Yeah, so a few things, now that I say that out loud, I need to do. I think the first step is I need to watch a bunch of things that do this. So we have The League, we have Curb Your Enthusiasm, Reno 911. These are all comedies, as you do. This is Spinal Tap. What We Do in the Shadows, the movie, I think, did this. Maybe not. I'm not sure. I'll have to look it up. But the guys that did this is Spinal Tap. There's a bunch of those. There's A Mighty Wind. But these are all mockumentaries. But I think they're semi-scripted, or I don't know. But I'm gonna try to go that direction. So it's not gonna be so hardcore, choreographed the way Blair Witch was kind of choreographed, even though it's presented as just found footage. This is gonna be much more like an exercise in acting, if that makes sense. That sounds a little like up my own ass a little bit, but it's the hope is, if I can get sort of this structure of a movie to work once, it's repeatable. It's a completely different way of shooting, obviously, but I think it's interesting. It could be its own thing where you don't need to necessarily, it's kind of like harkening back to mumblecore, if you've ever seen that. Mumblecore was early to mid 2000s, where it was just a bunch of kids got together and recorded farting around, basically. And then we got Greta Gerwig, Mark Duplass came out of that, a bunch of other people, Joe Swanberg. They all went on to bigger and better things that happen to be scripted, that happen to be a lot more production value. But I think this is a good starting point for like if you really pare down everything that a movie can be and still make it a satisfying movie without it being a person in a room doing an interview about an alien abduction, can you still make a movie that way and still have it feel like a movie, present like a movie, but also in theory, if you don't count the pre-work done for working with the actors and getting the equipment and everything, you shoot the movie in 2 days. And so that's the other attraction thing, is not only does it feel cheaper if I can get some version of this to work, but also, you know, it's the promise. Again, it harkens back to Mumblecore and like Joe Swanberg. Joe Swanberg, I watched an interview with, it was the movie Drinking Buddies, if you've ever seen that. Jake Johnson was talking about how he agreed to work with Joe Swanberg on Drinking Buddies, and it was that Joe Swanberg said, "Listen, you're going to improvise the whole movie." So that's another movie, actually. Now that I say it's improvised, you're gonna improvise. You're gonna kind of make your own character. You're gonna improvise, and it's gonna be 8-hour days. You're gonna be able to go home. You're gonna be able to go back to your hotel, or you're gonna be able to go to dinner afterwards. It's not gonna be these 12-hour grueling days that movies tend to be, and that's what Jake Johnson signed on for, because he had just gotten off of New Girl, I think, or maybe he was still on New Girl, which was a 22 episode sitcom season, and they did how many, like 8 or 9 seasons. So he was used to basically just not sleeping for 9 months, and so he gets to do a movie where it's just basically banker's hours. And so I think that aspect of it is really nice, where you can give actors a life. Obviously, I'm not going to do it that way because it's going to be a weekend camping trip, basically. But the same logic. It's not going to be just squeezing the most out of everybody in the production to maximize the quality of the production, so much as to, give the actors an opportunity to just purely act and capture it and still have that be a satisfying, visually interesting story that can sit amongst movies the way, any kind of genre movie would sit amongst other movies, if that makes sense. I feel like I pontificated way out of my own depth on this one, but now you know the logic. Cliff Notes is, I don't want to write dialogue because I just, if you've ever heard stilted dialogue that actors are forced to say, and you can, even if it's a good actor, if the dialogue sucks or if the dialogue just doesn't make sense when it's being shot, it's going to sound insane. Yeah. So I don't want to do that to actors, but I also want to, have some sort of model of making a movie that basically just doesn't work in the logic of the rules of how a traditional movie is made, because I think there's a more efficient way to do it in really specific circumstances, and I think this is a good sort of prototype for that. Having said that, I went to film school for writing, so there's that. But more than writing, more than beautiful shots, more than all that, I still think story is king, and I think this has the potential to be an efficient way to demonstrate, if not entertain, under the guise that story is king. Agree? Disagree? Too ambitious? Let me know. Catch you next time.